"Who is that child, Tessa?" My voice cracked across the neonatal ward before I could stop it. The young woman in the gray hoodie jerked around so hard the paper wristband on her arm snapped against the crib rail. She stared at me like she'd seen a ghost. Then she grabbed the baby carrier at her feet, pressed her body between me and the bassinet, and whispered the one sentence that made my blood turn to ice. "Please don't tell Wyatt you found us. Comment where you're watching from, and follow this family secret gets even darker." My name is Evelyn Mercer. I was 62 years old when I learned that the biggest lie in my life had not been told in a boardroom, a courtroom, or a bank. It had been told at my own dinner table, over roasted salmon and expensive wine, by my only son while I nodded, and believed him, because believing him required less courage than doubting him. For 36 years I built Mercer Cold Chain from one leased delivery van into one of the largest independent medical transport companies in the Midwest. We moved oncology drugs, transplant tissue, temperature-sensitive plasma, and clinical trial materials between hospitals, labs, and specialty pharmacies in Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Ohio. Every route had redundancies. Every cooler had a tracker. Every mistake had a cost. People trusted me with cargo that could mean the difference between life and death, and I ran my company like a woman who understood that a 2-degree drift can ruin everything. What I did not understand, not in time, was that a family can rot while looking perfectly climate-controlled from the outside. The woman standing in front of me that morning in Northwestern Memorial was my former daughter-in-law, Tessa Hale. Or at least that was still what I called her in my head, even though, according to my son, she had disappeared 17 months earlier with no warning, leaving behind debt, lies, and what he described as a trail of emotional wreckage. Wyatt had said she was unstable. He had said she had become paranoid after a difficult pregnancy that ended in a miscarriage. He had said she emptied a joint account, smashed a framed wedding photo, and vanished before dawn. He had said not to look for her. He had said if she wanted to be found, she would call. She never called me. So I let the silence become a story, and the story become fact. That morning I was not supposed to be anywhere near neonatal intensive care. I had an appointment with my cardiologist on the 10th floor because for 3 months I had been dealing with dizzy spells, a strange fogginess in the mornings, and a creeping exhaustion that made me feel as if someone had quietly turned the brightness down on my brain. My assistant had insisted I stop blaming age and overwork and get checked. The main elevator was packed. I took a service corridor to cut through radiology, made one wrong turn, and stepped into a waiting area filled with exhausted parents, pastel blankets, and the antiseptic smell of fear. That was when I saw Tessa. Her hair was shorter than I remembered. Her face was thinner. There were shadows under her eyes that no concealer could fake and no good sleep could erase. But it wasn't her face that stopped me. It was the baby in the bassinet beside her. A little girl, maybe 5 months old, with a round mouth, a tiny fist pressed against her cheek, and a dark birthmark just under her left ear. Wyatt had the same birthmark. Tessa looked from me to the baby and back again. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I took 1 step forward. She took 1 step back. The movement was instinctive, not dramatic. It was the movement of someone who already knew where the exits were. "Tessa," I said. "What is going on?" Her throat worked once. "You can't say my name that loud." "You vanished." Her eyes flashed, not with guilt, but with disbelief, so raw it embarrassed me. "That's the version he gave you?" The monitor attached to the baby's foot chirped softly. Tessa bent over the bassinet, adjusted the swaddle with careful fingers, and then looked at me again. Her entire body was trembling, but her voice, when it came, was stripped flat. "If Wyatt knows you saw me, he'll come for her." I still remember the exact sensation that moved through me at that moment. Not shock first, not anger, recognition. A sick, delayed recognition, like hearing the answer to a question you should have asked a year ago. Is she his? Tessa's eyes filled instantly, but she did not cry. Her name is June, and yes, June, my granddaughter. 5 months old and already hidden from me by the person I loved most. I sat down in the nearest plastic chair because my knees went unreliable all at once. The room hummed around us, air vents, footsteps, the low cadence of nurses at a station down the hall, but it felt as if every sound had been wrapped in cotton. "Tell me everything," I said. She let out a short laugh that wasn't humor. "Everything?" "Yes." Tessa glanced down the corridor twice before she answered. "I can't do this here." I looked at the baby. "Is she all right?" "She was early," Tessa said. "She's stable now. We're waiting on a discharge plan." Then she said something that cut deeper than anything louder could have. I begged him not to tell people I was crazy. There are moments when a person's entire moral self gets revealed not by what they say, but by what they suddenly remember. While Tessa stood in front of me, I remembered Wyatt telling me, months earlier, that Tessa had become obsessive and erratic. I remembered him mentioning a psychiatrist in Naperville who supposedly wanted to evaluate her for postpartum delusions after the miscarriage. I remembered Wyatt saying all this in the patient, burdened tone of a good husband doing his best. I remembered how quickly I had accepted the framing because it made the world neat: difficult young wife, long-suffering son, tragic but understandable separation. I had not once asked to speak to her myself. "I'm taking you somewhere safe," I said. Tessa's expression did not soften. Safe from who? The fact that she asked it with complete seriousness told me more than any accusation could have. "From him," I said. She stared at me for so long I thought she might walk away. Finally she said, "I need to know one thing first." "What?" "If I tell you the truth, are you going to protect your son or the child he tried to erase?" No one had spoken to me like that in years. No one inside my family, certainly. My employees respected me. Vendors feared disappointing me. Men with larger companies and poorer ethics had learned the hard way that I did not bluff. Yet there, in a hospital corridor, a 29-year-old woman in borrowed sneakers was forcing me to answer the only question that mattered. "I don't know yet what I'm protecting," I said, because lying then would have destroyed the last chance at honesty. "But if your child is in danger, I won't hand her back to it." She watched me carefully, as though measuring whether those words had bones inside them. Then she nodded once. "Not here," she repeated. "And no drivers from your company. No house your son knows. No calls he can trace." My first clear thought was not maternal. It was operational. She was speaking like someone who had been hunted methodically, which meant fear had likely been earned. I called the one person in my orbit whose discretion had never failed me. Dana Brooks, my former general counsel, 58, retired from corporate work after beating breast cancer and now doing selective consulting from a lake house in Michigan. Dana had spent 20 years cleaning up the kind of mess wealthy men create when they think charm is legal tender. She did not love anyone foolishly, including me. When she answered, I said, "I need a temporary apartment, unfurnished is fine. Cash if necessary, in a neighborhood Wyatt wouldn't drive through by accident, today." She didn't ask why. "How urgent?" "Hospital discharge urgent." A pause. "I have something in Ravenswood, corporate rental under another LLC, you'll need someone to stock it." "Done." Then I called my executive assistant, Nora Patel, and told her I was handling a private matter and would be offline for the rest of the day. Nora had been with me 9 years. She had the gift of understanding which questions were useful and which were vanity. She only said, "Do you need security?" "Yes," I said, "but discreet." By late afternoon, Tessa and June were in a small third-floor apartment with thrift store furniture, a folding crib, blackout curtains, and enough groceries for a week. I did not use one of my own drivers. I called a retired dispatcher named Leon who had once covered an overnight shift during a snowstorm and, when a courier abandoned a route, driven temperature-sensitive chemomeds across 2 counties himself without telling anyone because patients were waiting. Men like that do not advertise loyalty. They live it quietly. When June finally fell asleep, Tessa sat at the tiny kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea she never drank. I took the chair across from her. Rain tapped the windows. Somewhere below us a train rattled by. "You're going to think I should have called you," she said. "I already think I should have called you." Something in her face changed at that. Not trust, just a small shift away from bracing. She started at the beginning. Wyatt met Tessa 3 years earlier at a charity gala for a pediatric cancer foundation. She was a forensic accountant then, contracted by mid-size companies to untangle internal fraud and compliance failures. Wyatt, who had been helping more at Mercer Cold Chain after bouncing between half-serious ventures for most of his adult life, told her he admired women who could see under the floorboards. She laughed at that. She should not have. At first he was intoxicating in the polished, grown-man way certain privileged boys become when they've had enough practice watching other people lead. He sent flowers to her office, knew the names of indie restaurants before reservation apps did, listened with an intensity that felt flattering instead of acquisitive. He said he wanted a real life, not a decorative one. He said he was tired of women who only cared about the Mercer name. Tessa believed him because he knew how to talk like a man auditioning to be understood. They married fast. Too fast, she admitted. But he made urgency feel romantic, she said. The first fracture appeared when Tessa reviewed some high-level budgeting documents at home and noticed duplicate consulting charges to a vendor she didn't recognize, Halcyon Strategic Solutions. The invoices were small enough individually to disappear into a large operating budget, but regular enough to form a pulse. She asked Wyatt about them casually. He smiled and said they were tied to route optimization analytics. Only the numbers didn't make sense, Tessa said. The billing structure was sloppy. It looked like someone trying to mimic a professional services contract from memory. She forgot about it for 2 weeks. Then she saw the same vendor again in a reimbursement folder on Wyatt's iPad when he asked her to email himself a boarding pass. This time there was an address attached to the company, a UPS mailbox in Oak Brook. When she pressed him, his face changed in a way she had never seen before. Not explosive, worse, empty. He asked why I was going through his things. I said I wasn't. He asked whether I was always going to be this suspicious. Then he didn't speak to me for 2 days. That was the first time, Tessa said. Wyatt punished curiosity with silence and called it maturity. Around then another woman began showing up more often. Sloane Whitaker, a brand strategist in her early 40s whom Wyatt introduced as an outside consultant, helping reposition Mercer Cold Chain for expansion into direct-to-consumer specialty pharmacy deliveries. Sloane dressed like every room was already hers. She had the kind of eye contact people mistake for sincerity because it never wavered. At family dinners she praised my company with just enough restraint to flatter me, and challenged Tessa with tiny smiling questions that could pass as banter if you were not the target. She'd ask what it was like to marry into pressure, Tessa said. Or whether I ever worried that strong women make men feel unnecessary, things she could deny later. I remembered Sloane. Sharp cheekbones. Controlled laugh. Expensive handbags without logos. I had pegged her as ambitious and uninteresting. I was wrong on one of those counts. Tessa became pregnant. Wyatt was ecstatic in public and subtly cruel in private. He tracked where she went, who she met, what she spent. He began reframing ordinary disagreements as evidence she was overstimulated. If she cried, he called her unstable. If she stayed calm, he called her cold. He suggested meditation apps, then doctors, then one specific psychiatrist doctor, Reed Holloway, who supposedly specialized in maternal mental health. Did you go? I asked. Once. What happened? Her mouth tightened. I left feeling flayed. At the intake appointment, Dr. Holloway asked leading questions about stress, intrusive thoughts, anger, and fear, nothing obviously improper. But by the time the session ended, Wyatt seemed to know, within an hour, not just broad themes but exact phrases Tessa remembered using. She tested it the next week by mentioning a fabricated fear about dropping a lamp on herself. That night Wyatt told her she needed immediate help before your thoughts escalate. My hands flattened against the tabletop. He was speaking to your doctor. Or the doctor was speaking to him. That was when she started quietly documenting everything: appointments, arguments, missing bank statements, passwords that changed without warning. Then she miscarried at 11 weeks. The word landed between us with a heaviness that changed the air in the room. June was asleep 2 feet away, alive and warm and hidden, yet the ghost of another child had clearly stayed in that apartment with her mother. I'm sorry, I said. Tessa nodded as if accepting a receipt for a debt no one could repay. He used it. Of course he did. After the miscarriage, Wyatt doubled down on the narrative that Tessa was fragile, irrational, unreliable. When she questioned finances, he framed it as stress displacement. When she noticed Sloane calling after midnight, he told me she was grieving and inventing affairs. When she asked for access to their joint accounts, he said the banking interface was too confusing in her condition. When she threatened legal separation, he said a court would never trust a woman with documented delusional ideation. He had already begun laying track. You had documentation too, I said. She looked at me with a kind of exhausted pity. Against your son? With your name on half the institutions he moved through? Be serious, Evelyn. She was right. The Mercer surname opened doors and tilted assumptions. I had spent years pretending otherwise because that fiction made my success feel cleaner. Tessa left the house once and drove to her sister's condo in Milwaukee. Wyatt found her before midnight. She still does not know how. He stood outside in the snow, calm as a pastor, and told her that if she filed anything publicly, he would petition the court for emergency psychiatric intervention and attach statements from Dr. Holloway describing worsening symptoms. He said no judge gives a newborn to a woman who can't distinguish fear from reality. Newborn? I asked, confused. Tessa looked at June and then back at me. I got pregnant again before I finally left. And she had hidden it from him. Not intentionally at first. She found out late because her cycle had not normalized after the miscarriage. By then, Wyatt and Sloane were effectively operating like co-conspirators. not just lovers. Tessa once walked into Wyatt's home office and found Sloane sitting in my dead husband's leather chair, feet tucked beneath her, reviewing transfer logs with Wyatt as if she belonged there. When they saw Tessa, neither stood. "That's when I knew they weren't careless," she said. "They were confident. Confident people make dangerous enemies because they confuse access with invincibility." Tessa packed a bag 3 weeks later. Wyatt was out. She took cash, a burner phone purchased from a drugstore, and only the documents she could fit under the trunk liner of her car. She drove west, then north, then doubled back, switched hotels twice, and disappeared into a church-run maternity housing program in Rockford under her middle name. June was born premature after a placental complication. Tessa nearly died during delivery. She did not tell me. She did not tell anyone connected to Wyatt. She lived on freelance bookkeeping, donated diapers, and the kind of fear that organizes a woman more effectively than any planner ever could. Then she said the sentence that changed the entire shape of the story. "Wyatt wasn't just trying to control me. He was trying to take your company before anyone realized what he was doing." I felt something inside me go cold and beautifully clear. "Tell me." Tessa inhaled once. "The duplicate invoices weren't random. Halcyon Strategic Solutions is a shell. Sloane used it to invoice Mercer for services never rendered. Wyatt approved the charges using delegated authority you gave him when you were in Scottsdale after your knee surgery." I remembered. 2 years earlier I'd been away for 10 days, half-drugged on pain medication and physical therapy, while Wyatt handled routine sign-offs. At the time it had seemed harmless. He was my son, my heir, if one believed in that old-fashioned term. He had seemed eager to prove himself. "He said you knew," Tessa continued. "Then I noticed another pattern. Small vendor substitutions on less scrutinized routes, freight offsets that made no operational sense unless someone was siphoning value through layered reimbursements. I started building a spreadsheet. He found it." "What did he do?" He smiled. Then he asked whether I'd been sleeping. I closed my eyes for 1 second. When I opened them again, Tessa had gone pale. "There's more," she said, "and this is why I didn't call you even after June was born." I waited. "The morning brain fog you've been having?" My body stilled. "How do you know about that?" "Because Wyatt said it was starting." Every nerve in me seemed to lean toward her. She looked directly at me. "He told Sloane, in front of me, that if they were patient you'd begin making mistakes in public by summer." The room shrank. "What exactly did he say?" She answered from memory, each word precise. "You don't rush a competence story. You let people notice little things first. Repeat a name, miss a detail, lose your place in a meeting. Once they start filling in the blanks for you, the rest gets easier." I heard the train again below us, then the radiator clicking, then June stirring in the crib. It was astonishing how many small household sounds still existed while a life was rearranging itself. "Why would he say that?" I asked, although by then I had already begun to understand. Tessa swallowed. "Because Sloane brought him someone, a doctor or a source. I don't know, but she once handed him a supplement bottle and told him to switch your old routine out slowly so you wouldn't notice." For several seconds I could not speak. Every morning for 8 months, my son had made a point of asking whether I was remembering to take my cognitive support blend. He sent me articles about healthy aging. He teased me about becoming tech slow and then laughed and kissed my cheek. I had taken the capsules with grapefruit juice and a multivitamin and congratulated myself on being proactive. My first impulse was to lunge for my phone and call him. My second was to smash every dish in the apartment. Neither would have helped. Somewhere beneath the fury, the part of me that had built a transport empire under pressure took over. "Do you have proof?" I asked. Tessa shook her head. "Only what I saw, what I copied before he caught me, and what I still remember." "Where are the copies?" "In encrypted cloud storage, not under my real name." I almost laughed then, not because anything was funny, but because even terror had not fully stripped her competence. Good, I needed her competent. "Send everything to Dana," I said. "Not to me." Her gaze sharpened. "You believe me?" I stood and crossed to the counter because if I remained seated I might stop functioning. "No," I said. "I believe patterns. And your story explains several I've been too sentimental to examine." That night I went home to my house in Winnetka and moved through it like a trespasser. The place was glass, stone, and expensive, quiet. I opened the medicine cabinet in my bathroom and took down the amber bottle Wyatt had given me. The label said, Neurovance Methyl Support, white capsules, clean branding. No manufacturer name I recognized. At 1:12 a.m., I called Dr. Samuel Levin. Sam was 70 and mean in the helpful way some excellent physicians become after decades of watching patients lie to themselves. He was not my cardiologist, which was why I trusted him more. He specialized in clinical toxicology and had once served as an expert witness in a pharmaceutical contamination case for one of our hospital clients. He also hated Wyatt, though he'd always been too discreet to say it outright. When he answered with a sleep-ruined voice, I said, "I need a private lab run on a supplement, chain of custody, defensible if this turns ugly." He was awake instantly. How ugly? Potentially familial. That usually means catastrophic. Bring it at 6. I did not sleep. At dawn, I drove myself into the city, handed Sam the bottle, and listed every symptom. Morning dizziness, slowed recall, intermittent hand tremor, odd spells of confusion after breakfast that lifted by late afternoon. He asked what changed before the symptoms started. I told him about the supplement. He asked who purchased it. I said my son. Sam held my gaze for a full 3 seconds. "Stop taking it now. Do not mention testing. Do not throw it away. Do not switch bottles in front of anyone who could report back." Could report back to my son? "Evelyn," he said, "if you're calling me before sunrise instead of your regular doctor, then you already know what kind of answer you're afraid of." By noon I was in my office on the 23rd floor overlooking the river, staring at the skyline while Nora quietly rescheduled my week. Mercer headquarters always smelled faintly of coffee, printer toner, and refrigerated air. Usually it steadied me. That day it felt staged, as though I were standing on a set built to resemble my own life. I called up several months of vendor records myself, not through accounting, and searched Halcyon Strategic Solutions. There it was. Invoice after invoice. Market adaptation analysis. Digital consumer touchpoint mapping. Distribution reforecasting. Beautiful nonsense. The amounts ranged from $8,400 to $21,700, small enough to slide below the threshold that would trigger my personal review, large enough to accumulate elegantly over time. I pulled the approval logs. Wyatt's delegated credentials appeared on some, my own on others, even for dates I had been at charity luncheons, physician visits, or in the air. Either my access had been used without my knowledge or someone had manipulated timestamps. At 2:17 p.m., Nora knocked once and stepped in. "Wyatt is here early for tomorrow's route strategy meeting. He says he can wait." I looked at her. "How does he seem?" She hesitated, which meant she had an answer. "Relaxed, very relaxed. Tell him I had to leave for a medical appointment, offer him coffee and then say the meeting's postponed." She started to go, then turned back. "Evelyn, do you want me to flag IT?" Nora never used my first name unless she wanted me to hear the seriousness in her voice. "Yes," I said. Quietly. "Pull server access logs from my credentials for the last 18 months. Do not route through Kevin." Kevin ran internal systems and reported operationally to Wyatt for certain tech modernization projects. I had approved that structure myself. The memory disgusted me. "Understood," she said. At 7:40 that evening, Sam called. "What's in it?" I asked before he finished saying hello. "A rotating low-dose cocktail," he said. "Mostly sedating agents and compounds that can impair concentration and memory consolidation over time. Not enough to kill you quickly, enough to age you on paper." I sat down hard on the edge of my bed. "Can it explain the cardiology symptoms?" "It can explain most of what you described. I also want blood work, but yes." He let the silence sit. Good doctors know when information needs weight. "Sam," I said. "How long before it became obvious?" "If you kept taking it?" "Months, maybe a year. Depends on dosing, liver function, all of it. But the point is not physical collapse, the point is credibility erosion. A few public lapses. A few worried comments from people around you. Maybe a recommendation that you step back from daily management. Maybe a temporary conservatorship if someone wanted to be especially ambitious." Conservatorship. The word hit like a steel door slamming. Years earlier, after my husband Grant died, he had left his estate in a trust structure that protected company voting control from outside acquisition if I became incapacitated. The acting trustee in that event would not be a stranger. It would be Wyatt, unless I changed it. My son had not been trying to make me sick because he wanted me dead. He wanted me diminished, documented, professionally doubted, and legally displaced while remaining alive enough to make the transfer look compassionate. That is a particular kind of evil, not the theatrical kind that screams, the administrative kind that smiles and asks whether you need help managing your calendar. I spent the next 3 days building a case instead of a reaction. First, I moved the trust revision through a boutique estate attorney in Lake Forest who had no relationship to Wyatt. The documents removed him as successor trustee and replaced him with a 3-person independent committee: Dana, a retired judge named Malcolm Voss, and my longtime CPA, Geraldine Chu. The amendment was signed, notarized, and lodged before Wyatt knew there had ever been a vulnerability. Second, I had Nora coordinate with an outside cybersecurity firm under the pretext of a compliance audit. By the second day, they confirmed that my login had been accessed remotely through a credential mirror installed on a secondary laptop Wyatt had once borrowed for presentations. There were also suspicious login sessions from an IP range tied to a private apartment in Gold Coast leased to Sloan Whitaker. Third, Dana assembled a legal team that knew how to move fast without leaking. She read Tessa's copied files, the Shell invoices, the supplement report, and the access logs, then looked at me over her glasses and said, "Your son is either catastrophically arrogant or he assumed maternal denial was part of his security architecture." I said nothing. Dana softened by half an inch. "That wasn't cruelty, that was legal analysis." "It was both," I said. "Good," she replied. "That means you're awake." Meanwhile, Tessa continued feeding us pieces that made the picture sharper. Wyatt and Sloan were not merely stealing, they were preparing narrative cover. Tessa found draft talking points once on Wyatt's laptop: concerns about my recent forgetfulness, notes on succession optics, reminders to loop key vendors into a stability message if leadership changes became necessary. One line chilled me most: "Better if transition appears physician, guided, not contested." He had workshop notes for my professional decline. I should tell you something unflattering. Even with all that, some traitorous part of me still wanted an alternative explanation. Not innocence. Just another villain greater than Wyatt. Maybe Sloan manipulated him, maybe Dr. Holloway or some shadowy advisor had exploited his insecurity. Maybe my son was weak, not monstrous. Then Carlos Vega arrived. Carlos was the private investigator Dana trusted when reputation damage had to be prevented before it spread. Former IRS Criminal Division, built like an exhausted linebacker, possessed the unnerving habit of sounding mildly bored while delivering life-ruining facts. He met me in Dana's office, laid out printed photos and a timeline, and began. Wyatt had visited Sloan's Gold Coast apartment regularly for 21 months, not romantic drop-ins, operational meetings, documents in and out, laptops, banker boxes, a storage unit in both their names under an LLC connected to Halcyon. 3 meetings with a probate litigator known for incapacity petitions. 2 private dinners with Dr. Reed Holloway, billed through a hospitality group tied to one of Sloan's clients. 1 consultation with a public relations specialist who handled executive health messaging for family-owned businesses after scandal or death. Carlos slid 1 final page toward me. "This," he said, "is what I think matters most." It was a copy of a calendar entry recovered from a sync device. "Emergency capacity play. Late August window best if symptomatic trend continues. There are betrayals that wound because they are cruel, and betrayals that wound because they are meticulous." This was the second kind. My son had not exploded my life in a moment of rage. He had scheduled it. "Can we take this to prosecutors now?" I asked. Dana answered before Carlos could. "Not yet. We need them talking on record, or moving money after notice, or attempting execution of documents we can tie to the scheme. White-collar cases become stronger when smart people think they're still the smartest people in the room. What do you suggest?" She smiled without warmth. "Invite them into a room where they believe they're winning." 3 days later, Wyatt called me himself. "Mom, you sound tired," he said. "Are you sleeping?" His voice came through the speaker in my car smooth as polished marble. For an instant I was 6 months pregnant, watching him kick under my skin on a grainy ultrasound. For an instant I was 42, helping him tie a tie before prom. For an instant I was 59, listening to him cry after Grant's funeral and thinking grief had made him gentler. "No worse than usual," I said. "You should really let me take some of the pressure off. The board has noticed how much you're carrying." We did not have a formal board. Mercer had advisory directors, not a board with operating power. The imprecision was deliberate. He wanted me imagining concern gathering around me. "Maybe we should talk about that," I said. A beat of pleased surprise crossed the line, almost audible. "I'd like that. Come by the house on Sunday, dinner, just you." "I can do that," he said. "Want me to bring the supplement refill? I know you're almost out." I looked through the windshield at red taillights blurring in rain. "No," I said. "I think I may switch brands." That tiny silence after my sentence was the sound of a man recalculating. "Probably smart," he said lightly. "Talk Sunday." The plan Dana designed was brutal, but clean. We would not confront Wyatt with accusations he could lawyer around. We would stage a transition conversation. I would appear shaky, privately worried, maybe ready to step back, temporarily. He would be invited to discuss formal authority expansion at a small leadership retreat I claimed I wanted before making any decisions. Because Mercer's annual strategic offsite was approaching, no one would find it odd. The meeting would be held in our company's training center outside Schaumburg, a glass and steel building with conference rooms wired for internal presentations and, more importantly, legal recording capacity when consent was properly obtained through posted notice and attendance protocols. Dana arranged for state and federal investigators to be nearby once we had enough to hand them. Sam prepared an affidavit regarding the supplement. Nora coordinated access restrictions, so Wyatt would not realize his mirrored credentials were already isolated. Carlos monitored money movement. Geraldine, our CPA, finished tracing nearly $2.1 million in fraudulent payments, padded vendor contracts, and diverted reimbursements. $2.1 million. You can hide almost any theft inside a big company if you understand how fatigue works. No single line item screams. No single quarter collapses. The crime relies on one thing above all: decent people being busy. Sunday dinner at my house was one of the hardest performances of my life. Wyatt arrived in a navy sweater and the expression of a devoted son. He kissed my cheek, brought a bottle of Barolo, and admired the tulips on the dining room table. I had loved those gestures once. That may be the most humiliating part of betrayal, realizing how much poison can be delivered through manners. I served short ribs, polenta, roasted broccolini. He complimented the food, asked after my garden, mentioned an article on cognitive strain in women over 60 and caught himself too late. I pretended not to notice. Halfway through dinner I set my fork down and let my hand tremble slightly. I didn't have to fake much. Rage can mimic frailty if you contain it hard enough. "Wyatt," I said, "I need to talk to you about something difficult." He leaned in immediately, concerned, available, tender. It was a master class. "I've had a few moments recently," I said. "Names, details. I don't know if it's stress or something else, but I'm beginning to think I may need to reduce some responsibilities." He held my gaze so steadily I could see the effort it cost him not to move too fast. "Mom," he said softly, "thank you for telling me." I almost admired the line, not what it meant, just the craft. "I don't want panic in the company," I continued. "And I don't want vultures circling. So I was thinking we could talk through a temporary authority plan. Just us, Dana, Geraldine maybe, quietly." "Of course," he said, "whatever protects you." Protects you. The urge to throw my wine in his face was so strong I had to press my nails into my palm beneath the table. "I booked the training center for Tuesday afternoon," I said. "Small group, no one else knows the topic." He nodded. "That's smart." Then he made his first mistake. "Sloan should be there," he said. "She understands external messaging and would help frame this so employees don't misread routine transition." He had moved too quickly from private concern to strategic optics. Too smoothly. Too ready. I let my shoulders sink. "You think that's wise?" "Yes," he said. "Especially if this becomes visible. Better to control the narrative before people create one." There it was. Not a son worrying about a mother. A planner protecting a rollout. I gave a slow, uncertain nod. "All right." After dessert he hugged me in the foyer and whispered, "You're doing the right thing." When the front door closed behind him, I stood motionless for several seconds in the darkened hallway, then I went straight to the sink and vomited. Tuesday arrived cold and bright. The conference room at the training center had floor-to-ceiling windows, a walnut table, 2 cameras in plain sight for meeting documentation, and posted legal notice regarding audio and video capture on the wall outside. Dana insisted we keep everything clean. No tricks that could contaminate a future case. Wyatt and Sloan both entered under their own signatures. Investigators waited 2 rooms away. Federal interest had increased because some of the fraudulent billing touched materials moved under contracts reimbursed through government programs. Once public money brushes private theft, the room gets more crowded. I wore charcoal, no jewelry except Grant's watch, and the face I used when terminating executives. Wyatt arrived first. Sloan came 2 minutes later, wrapped in cream wool and confidence. She gave me a sympathetic half-smile. "Evelyn," she said, "I'm sorry this season has been so heavy." My laugh surprised even me. "Sit down, Sloan." Dana and Geraldine were already there. Nora was not. I had intentionally kept her away from the final collision. Some people earn the right not to witness blood. Wyatt glanced at the documents stacked before each seat. "What's this?" "A transition packet," I said. He relaxed. I let that last exactly 3 seconds. Then I opened the black binder in front of me and slid the first document toward him, the toxicology report. "This is what has been in the supplement you encouraged me to take every morning," I said. His face did not collapse. Good liars rarely give you theater on cue. It went still instead. Sloane looked at the page and then at Wyatt, not with surprise but with anger at being forced onto unfamiliar ground too soon. "There must be some mistake," Wyatt said carefully. "Possibly," I replied. "So let's keep going." I slid the second document forward. Server logs. Third document, Shell invoices. Fourth, IP traces to Sloane's apartment. Fifth, draft succession notes. Sixth, trust amendment showing Wyatt was no longer successor trustee. Seventh, preliminary forensic accounting summary quantifying losses. No one spoke. Sometimes the most powerful moment in a confrontation is not the accusation but the administration of sequence. Fact after fact. Door after door closing. Wyatt read faster as the stack grew. Sloane stopped pretending to review and began thinking strategically, which made her eyes sharper and colder. Dana said nothing. Geraldine folded her hands. The air conditioner hummed overhead. Finally Wyatt looked up. "This is an ambush." "Yes," I said. "Professionally assembled." Sloane leaned back. "Evelyn, with respect, you're stringing unrelated data points into a melodrama because you're scared of aging." The sentence was so revealing it almost felt charitable of her to say it out loud. "You should have let Wyatt handle this privately," she continued. "Now you're creating risk where there could have been discretion." "There, the royal we." I turned to Wyatt. "Would you like to tell me where June is?" For the first time, actual alarm flickered. He recovered quickly. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Tessa does." His jaw locked. Sloane's head snapped toward him, very slightly. She had not known I knew about Tessa. Valuable. "You told me she miscarried and disappeared," I said. "You neglected to mention the living daughter you've been trying to keep hidden." Wyatt's voice came low and dangerous. "Tessa is not well." Dana finally spoke. "Careful." He ignored her. "She has always been unstable and whatever she's told you," "Whatever she told me," I interrupted, "is supported by enough corroboration to end your life as you know it." He stood abruptly, chair scraping. I remained seated. "You want to destroy your own son over a vindictive woman and some accounting noise?" he said. "Accounting noise." Geraldine inhaled once through her nose, the closest I had ever seen her come to visible contempt. "What I want," I said, "is to hear which part you plan to deny under oath." He looked at me then, really looked. And I think that was the first moment he understood I was gone from him, not undecided, gone. Sloane reached for the one angle she had left. "If there are irregularities, they can be corrected. Nobody needs law enforcement in a family matter." Dana pressed a button beneath the table. The interior door opened. 2 federal agents entered with 1 assistant U.S. attorney and a state investigator from the Attorney General's office. Their timing was exquisite. Sloane actually closed her eyes for 1 second, furious with herself. Wyatt went pale. "What is this?" "This," Dana said, "is the point at which poor choices become formal proceedings." The next 10 minutes unfolded with the cold efficiency of machinery that had been lubricated in advance. Rights were explained. Phones collected. Wyatt tried to speak twice, stopped by counsel's advice when the prosecutor noted there might be grounds including fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult depending on charging determinations. Sloane asked for her attorney. Sensible. Finally. Then Wyatt made the mistake Dana had predicted he would make. He turned to me, not the agents, and said, "You picked her over me." Her. Not them, not the allegations, not the facts. Her. I stood slowly. "No, Wyatt. I picked reality over you." His expression changed then, and what surfaced was not grief. It was resentment, so old and deep it must have been living in him long before Sloane sharpened it. "You built a kingdom and expected me to kneel for scraps," he said. The agents allowed him a few more words. "Sometimes confession arrives wearing self-pity." "I was never going to be enough for you," he continued, voice shaking now. "You loved competence more than people. You made everyone perform just to be seen." There was truth in that, which made it hit harder. Parents like tidy moral weather, innocent self on one side, storm on the other. Life is usually filthier. I had been demanding. I had mistaken provision for intimacy. I had loved Wyatt, but I had also trained him to believe worth was measured publicly. Sloane had likely taken that wound and taught him to monetize it. None of that excused what he did. You may be right about parts of me, I said. You are not right about your crimes. He laughed once, shattered and ugly. Crimes? You mean adaptation? It was such a revealing word that even the prosecutor's brows lifted. They led him out in handcuffs through the side corridor to avoid employees. Sloane followed separately, chin high, as though posture could still negotiate. The room emptied until only Dana, Geraldine, and I remained. My body started shaking only after the door closed. Dana came around the table and put both hands on my shoulders. Stay upright, she said quietly. You can fall apart in exactly 6 minutes. I need signatures first. I laughed despite myself, then signed where she pointed. That night, after every initial filing, hold notice, and emergency communication had gone out, I drove to the Ravenswood apartment. Tessa opened the door with June on her hip. The baby was awake this time, blinking in the yellow lamplight, cheeks plump, one sock half off. She stared at me with serious dark eyes that were unmistakably Mercer eyes, though I hated myself a little for claiming them. It's over, I said. Tessa didn't move. What does over mean? It means he can't reach your address through the company. He can't move my money. He can't use my name to bury you, and every lawyer in Chicago who matters now knows there is a record. Her face crumpled so suddenly it frightened me. She turned away and pressed her mouth to June's hair to muffle the sound that came out of her, not dramatic sobbing, the opposite. The quiet, broken release of someone whose nervous system has forgotten how to come down safely. I stepped inside and closed the door. June reached toward my necklace. I held still while her tiny fingers caught the chain. There are moments when a child's ordinary gesture feels supernatural because of all the catastrophe surrounding it. This was one of them. What happens now? Tessa asked after a while. Now, I said, we rebuild only what deserves rebuilding. The legal months that followed were ugly, slow, and expensive, which is to say they were legal months. Search warrants hit the storage unit. Investigators found original shell company paperwork, draft incapacity petition materials, burner phones, and metadata tying invoice fabrication to devices used by both Wyatt and Sloane. Dr. Holloway hired counsel immediately and denied impropriety, but his records were subpoenaed. Whether he would ultimately face sanctions or worse was not mine to control. For once, I let systems work without trying to outrun them. Mercer Cold Chain survived because people better than my family held it up while I was busy being betrayed. Nora kept staff communications clear without feeding gossip. Geraldine stabilized lender confidence. Dana fenced off opportunists who smelled vulnerability. And then there was Patrick Sloane, no relation to Sloane Whitaker, a regional operations director I had underused for years because he was competent without ever making noise about it. Patrick took over route continuity across 3 states during the scandal's worst stretch and never once tried to leverage my weakness for title inflation. It was humbling to realize how many real leaders had been standing quietly in the wings while I fixated on making my son one by force. Tessa, meanwhile, refused my first offer of financial support. I'm not doing dependency, she said. Then call it restitution, I answered. That got her attention. We structured it properly, housing support documented as a secured advance recoverable from marital asset proceedings if available, childcare coverage through a trust for June that bypassed both parents directly, and legal representation fully independent from mine. Dana insisted on the separation. If you rescue her sloppily, she told me, your son's lawyers will call it influence. So we did it cleanly. Tessa started contract work again, this time reviewing internal controls for non-profit clinics and smaller manufacturers who needed anti-fraud systems but couldn't afford a large firm. She was very good at it because she had seen fraud, not as abstraction but as atmosphere. Fear teaches pattern recognition. As for me, I testified before a grand jury with a steadier voice than I expected. Sam helped unwind the effects of the drugging. The fog lifted gradually over 6 weeks. Certain mornings I would realize I had remembered a vendor detail, a route exception, a donor's spouse's name without effort, and rage would flare fresh because ability I thought I was losing had been stolen, not surrendered. One gray afternoon in November, I visited Wyatt at the detention center. Dana advised against it. Sam called it masochism. I went anyway. He looked thinner, not broken, just deglossed. Wealth had always rested on him like a flattering filter. Without it, he looked more like Grant than I was prepared for. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The phone between us smelled faintly of disinfectant and old plastic. You shouldn't have come, he said first. Probably not. He gave a humorless smile. You always did hate inefficiency. And you always did think insight was the same as apology. That landed. He rubbed one hand over his mouth. Sloan says they're overcharging to force cooperation. Possibly. You're not helping. No, I said. I'm not. He looked away. Did you really meet the baby? There it was. Not my daughter. The baby. Distance even now. Yes. Does she look like me? I thought of June's birthmark, the shape of her eyes, the furious dignity of her little frown when hungry, enough to make me protective. He flinched. Good. For a few minutes he said nothing. Then, in a voice quieter than I had ever heard from him, he said, I didn't start out wanting it to go that far. People say that as if moral collapse is a cliff when usually it's a staircase. How far did you think drugging me would go? I asked. His eyes filled, but whether with regret, self-pity, or sheer exhaustion I could not tell. I thought you'd step back. I thought you'd finally stop making me audition. The accusation hit a bruise because it was not wholly invented. Wyatt had grown up in a house where excellence was normal and softness often postponed. After Grant died, I poured myself into the company so completely that I called it survival. Maybe it was. It was also avoidance. Children raised near powerful grief often learn to perform usefulness if they want attention. Wyatt had learned that lesson too well, and then, at some point, decided performance alone would never earn him what he wanted, so he replaced earning with taking. I failed you in ways, I said. Not the ways you wanted me to fail, but some ways are real. He shut his eyes. I'm not saying that to comfort you, I added. I'm saying it because lying is what got us here. When I stood to leave, he finally looked directly at me. Do you hate me? I considered answering quickly and refused myself that escape. No, I said. That would be simpler. Outside, snow had started. I sat in my car and cried for the first time since the hospital. Not because I doubted what I had done. Because justice and grief are not opposites. Sometimes they arrive holding hands. Winter hardened the city. Then it passed. By April, the worst charges had solidified, plea discussions had begun for lower-level cooperators, and Sloane's reputation in the consulting world had combusted so thoroughly that even her old admirers started speaking of her in the past tense. Dr. Holloway's license was suspended pending review. Halcyon Strategic Solutions ceased to exist except as evidence. I changed almost everything at Mercer. Independent audit committee, dual approval architecture, vendor verification loops, external ethics hotline. No family members in delegated signature roles, ever. I also did something far more difficult. I invited criticism from people below me. Real criticism, anonymous at first, then direct. What I learned was brutal and useful. I was admired, yes. Also feared in ways that silenced bad news until it fermented. Systems fail when truth has to dress up before entering the room. One of the anonymous comments said, "You trust competence, but only when it looks like your version of strength." I printed that line and kept it in my desk. In June, on a warm Saturday that smelled like cut grass and lake wind, Tessa brought June to my house for the first time without tension stiffening every movement. We sat on the back terrace where Grant used to drink bourbon and pretend he wasn't sentimental about hydrangeas. June was 10 months old then, all determined crawling and sudden laughter. She made straight for the dog bowl, ignored 3 expensive educational toys, and tried to chew the leg of a teak chair. She was perfect. Tessa watched her with that wary softness mothers wear when they still don't fully trust peace. "She likes you," I said. June had just slammed both palms onto my shin and announced something that sounded like a corporate threat in baby syllables. "She likes everyone who doesn't lie to her," Tessa replied. I looked at her. She smiled, and for the first time the smile did not seem borrowed from survival. We talked then in a way we had never managed when she was married to Wyatt plainly, without triangulation. She told me she used to think wealthy families were louder in their dysfunction. I told her money doesn't reduce drama, it just gives it cleaner countertops. She laughed. I admitted I had been unfair to her from the start, not in open hostility but in the more damaging way of assuming she could handle whatever my son was. She admitted she mistook my composure for indifference. We did not make a ceremony of forgiveness. Real repair is usually less cinematic than people want. It sounds more like, "Would you like more coffee?" and "Text me when you get home." That fall, June took her first steps in my kitchen between the refrigerator and the island, while Tessa and I shouted like she had personally solved world hunger. She was wearing striped leggings and one of those bibs with a tiny embroidered strawberry on it. She walked exactly 4 steps, sat down hard, and looked offended by gravity. I laughed so hard I had to brace myself on the counter. Later that night, after Tessa loaded June into the car seat, she turned back at the door. You know, she said, I almost hate that you're turning out to be one of the safest people in our lives. Almost? Don't push it. Then she hugged me. It was brief, awkward, and worth more than several of the plaques in my office. People like endings tied with satin ribbon, courts conclude, villains pay, survivors heal, families reconcile. Life is stingier than that. Wyatt's case did not produce emotional closure on the same schedule as legal milestones. Some mornings I still woke with a physical ache behind my ribs when I remembered the little boy who used to sleep on Grant's chest. Some nights I revisited every missed sign and found new ways to blame myself. Accountability does not erase maternal reflex. It simply teaches it where not to go. But there was a payoff, a real one. The following spring, Mercer held its first employee town hall under the new governance structure. We hosted it in the same training center where Wyatt's scheme collapsed. I almost chose another venue out of superstition. Then I realized that would be giving memory too much territory. I stood at the front of the room and told the truth edited for legal reasons, but truth all the same. I said our company had survived a serious internal breach. I said some warning signs were missed because authority was too concentrated and challenge was culturally expensive. I said no legacy, including mine, was above review. You could feel the room change as people understood I was not performing invincibility. Relief moved through them like weather. After the formal remarks, employees lined up with questions, some practical, some sharp. One route supervisor from Gary, a woman named Elise with 19 years in refrigerated logistics and zero patience for executive euphemism, asked, "How do we know this doesn't happen again if the next person at the top is family too?" The old me might have parried, the new one answered. "You don't know," I said. "That's why the system won't rely on my assurances anymore." There was a beat, then actual applause. Not because I was brilliant, because honesty in rooms like that feels rare enough to startle. When it ended, I stepped outside alone for a moment into the late afternoon light. The parking lot shimmered with heat. Trucks moved on the expressway beyond the trees. My phone buzzed. It was a photo from Tessa. June, in a high chair, yogurt on her face, one hand raised like she was testifying before Congress. Caption: "She just said Evie like she runs the place." I stared at the picture until my vision blurred. That was the real payoff, not the charges. Not the recovered funds. Not even the public survival of the company I had given my life to. It was this. The child my son tried to disappear would grow up where the truth had a fighting chance. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but honestly. And me? I learned too late and just in time that love without scrutiny is not kindness. It is negligence wearing perfume. If you're listening to this, and something in your life suddenly makes more sense than you want it to, don't wait for a catastrophe to validate your instincts. Suspicion is not cruelty when it protects the innocent, and silence is not peace when a liar is the one benefiting from it. Comment honestly. Could you forgive your own child after this? Follow for more high-stakes family drama.